Introduction to Virtual Reality and Philosophical Questions. Imagine waking up in a world where the line between what's real and what's virtual is so blurred, you can't tell the difference. You walk outside, but instead of feeling the cold wind on your face, you're greeted by an endless sunset, with every single detail crafted with precision, not by nature, but by code. Virtual reality isn't just a tool for entertainment anymore. It's becoming a doorway to entirely new worlds, where the rules of physics can be bent, where your body can be transformed, and where your environment can shift in the blink of an eye. The horizon stretches out, but it's not bound by the constraints of Earth. You could step off a cliff and float, or even transform into something entirely new, an avatar of your own creation. But as exciting as this sounds, it raises a profound question. What does it mean for our understanding of existence? For millennia, philosophers have debated the nature of reality. Is the world we perceive around us truly real, or is it just a projection of our minds? From Plato's Allegory of the Cave to Descartes' famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am," we've been obsessed with trying to figure out what's real and what's illusion. But now, thanks to VR, this question isn't just an abstract philosophical exercise anymore. It's something we're facing head-on in real time. As VR continues to evolve, it brings with it deeper implications. What happens when the virtual worlds we create start to feel as real as the physical world? Can a reality crafted from lines of code ever be truly authentic? How will living in these digital spaces affect our sense of self, our relationships, and even our ethical responsibilities? These are not questions for the distant future. They are questions for right now. Virtual reality's rise. Virtual reality has exploded in recent years, and what started as a niche interest for tech enthusiasts and gamers has now spread across industries. Today, VR is used not only for immersive gaming, but also in fields like education, medicine, therapy, architecture, and even social interaction. The idea that people could work, learn, and socialize within virtual worlds no longer sounds like science fiction. It's becoming an everyday reality. The history of virtual reality goes back farther than you might think. Early pioneers of VR, like Morton Heilig in the 1960s, envisioned technology that would allow people to step inside cinematic experiences. Over the decades, innovators built on this idea, and we've seen VR technology improve from crude headsets with limited capabilities to the powerful devices we have today, capable of immersing users in incredibly lifelike environments. But with this power comes a flood of new questions, and that's where things get interesting. These questions aren't just about technology, they're deeply philosophical. They force us to re-examine the very foundation of what reality is and how we interact with it. Philosophical grounding. Think about this. What if the world around us is not the real world? This concept has been explored for centuries in philosophy. Plato's Allegory of the Cave, one of the most famous metaphors in Western philosophy, describes a group of people living in a cave who only see shadows of objects cast on the wall. They believe those shadows are the only reality until one of them escapes and sees the outside world for the first time. VR brings this allegory to life. Except in this case, we are choosing to step into the cave, willingly immersing ourselves in a reality that we know is constructed, but that feels incredibly real. But it doesn't stop there. Consider Descartes' evil demon theory, where he speculates that everything we perceive might be an illusion created by a malicious entity. Virtual reality echoes this sentiment. Only this time, the entity is a software developer or an AI, crafting environments and experiences that we willingly participate in. Let me ask you this. Can virtual worlds ever replace real ones? Are they just glorified illusions, or could they become a legitimate form of existence, just as valid as the physical world we inhabit? If a virtual reality is vivid enough, do our experiences in it hold the same weight as those in the real world? What happens when we start spending more time in virtual spaces than in the real world? Will our relationships, jobs, and even our sense of self shift as we integrate deeper into these digital environments. Could living in virtual reality lead to the development of entirely new forms of society, where physical presence becomes secondary to digital existence? Most importantly, will these new realities challenge or even change the way we define existence itself? If we can create worlds where we can live, work, and even love, do we need to rethink our definitions of what it means to be alive or real? In this video, we will journey through the philosophical implications of virtual reality and attempt to answer these questions. VR has already begun to blur the lines between the real and the imagined, and it's only the beginning. By the end of this exploration, you might be looking at the virtual and the real world in a whole new way. The answers may surprise you, and the implications could change the way you think about reality forever. The nature of reality. Can we create new realities? What makes something real? It's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. In the past, reality was defined by our sensory experiences, what we could see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. But now, with the advancement of virtual reality, we are stepping into a new era where what we experience can be entirely generated by technology. These virtual worlds feel real. They look real, but are they truly real? Or are they just elaborate illusions, like a dream or a hologram? To answer this, we must first understand the difference between a virtual reality and the so-called physical reality we inhabit. Physical reality is bound by the laws of physics, gravity, time, space, and matter. In contrast, virtual reality is bound only by the limits of our imagination and the technology we have at our disposal. This means we can create worlds where the rules of physics don't apply, where time can be sped up or slowed down, and where the boundaries of space are infinite. But does the fact that we can manipulate these factors make virtual worlds any less real? Plato's cave. Perception versus reality. To dive deeper into this, let's turn to one of the most famous philosophical thought experiments, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. In this allegory, Plato describes a group of prisoners who have lived their entire lives chained inside a cave, facing a blank wall. Behind them, there's a fire, and objects are placed in front of the fire to cast shadows on the wall. These prisoners, having never seen anything but these shadows, come to believe that the shadows are the only reality. To them, the world of shadows is as real as anything else. But what happens when one prisoner is freed and steps outside the cave for the first time? He is blinded by the sunlight, overwhelmed by the true reality that exists beyond the shadows. In this context, our current experiences in virtual reality can be likened to stepping back into the cave. The worlds we experience in VR are shadows, representations of things, but not the things themselves. However, just like in Plato's allegory, those shadows can feel incredibly real to the people experiencing them. The question becomes, if these virtual worlds become increasingly convincing, will we even care whether we're seeing the shadows or the real thing? Virtual worlds and dreams. Are they less real? Now let's compare VR to something we all experience regularly, dreams. When we dream, our minds create entire worlds, people, and experiences. While we're dreaming, those experiences feel real. You might be running in a forest, flying over a city, or talking to a loved one who's no longer alive. For the duration of that dream, your brain believes what you're experiencing is real. It's only when you wake up that you realize it was all a product of your mind. So, if we accept that dreams can feel as real as waking life, does that make them any less valid as experiences? After all, the emotions you feel in a dream, fear, joy, love, are real. You carry those feelings with you when you wake up. The same can be said for virtual reality. When you're fully immersed in a virtual world, your brain can't easily distinguish between real and virtual experiences. The fear you feel when you stand on the edge of a virtual cliff is just as real as the fear you'd feel in the physical world. The question is, Does it matter that the cliff isn't real? Let me ask you this. Can virtual worlds ever replace real ones? Are they just glorified illusions? Or could they become a legitimate form of existence, just as valid as the physical world we inhabit? If a virtual reality is vivid enough, do our experiences in it hold the same weight as those in the real world? What happens when we start spending more time in virtual spaces than in the real world? Will our relationships, jobs, and even our sense of self shift as we integrate deeper into these digital environments? Could living in virtual reality lead to the development of entirely new forms of society, where physical presence becomes secondary to digital existence? Most importantly, will these new realities challenge or even change the way we define existence itself? If we can create worlds where we can live, work, and even love, do we need to rethink our definitions of what it means to be alive or real? In this video, we will journey through the philosophical implications of virtual reality and attempt to answer these questions. VR has already begun to blur the lines between the real and the imagined, and it's only the beginning. By the end of this exploration, you might be looking at the virtual and the real world in a whole new way. The answers may surprise you, and the implications could change the way you think about reality forever. The nature of reality. Can we create new realities? What makes something real? It's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. In the past, reality was defined by our sensory experiences, what we could see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. But now, with the advancement of virtual reality, we are stepping into a new era where what we experience can be entirely generated by technology. These virtual worlds feel real. They look real. But are they truly real? Or are they just elaborate illusions, like a dream or a hologram? To answer this, we must first understand the difference between a virtual reality and the so-called physical reality we inhabit. Physical reality is bound by the laws of physics, gravity, time, space, and matter. In contrast, virtual reality is bound only by the limits of our imagination and the technology we have at our disposal. This means we can create worlds where the rules of physics don't apply, where time can be sped up or slowed down, and where the boundaries of space are infinite. But does the fact that we can manipulate these factors make virtual worlds any less real? Plato's cave. Perception versus reality. To dive deeper into this, let's turn to one of the most famous philosophical thought experiments, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. In this allegory, Plato describes a group of prisoners who have lived their entire lives chained inside a cave, facing a blank wall. Behind them, there's a fire, and objects are placed in front of the fire to cast shadows on the wall. These prisoners, having never seen anything but these shadows, come to believe that the shadows are the only reality. To them, the world of shadows is as real as anything else. But what happens when one prisoner is freed and steps outside the cave for the first time? He is blinded by the sunlight, overwhelmed by the true reality that exists beyond the shadows. In this context, our current experiences in virtual reality can be likened to stepping back into the cave. The worlds we experience in VR are shadows, representations of things, but not the things themselves. However, just like in Plato's allegory, those shadows can feel incredibly real to the people experiencing them. The question becomes, if these virtual worlds become increasingly convincing, will we even care whether we're seeing the shadows or the real thing? Virtual worlds and dreams. Are they less real? Now let's compare VR to something we all experience regularly. Dreams. When we dream, our minds create entire worlds, people, and experiences. While we're dreaming, those experiences feel real. You might be running in a forest, flying over a city, or talking to a loved one who's no longer alive. For the duration of that dream, your brain believes what you're experiencing is real. It's only when you wake up that you realize it was all a product of your mind. So, if we accept that dreams can feel as real as waking life, does that make them any less valid as experiences? After all, the emotions you feel in a dream, fear, joy, love, are real. You carry those feelings with you when you wake up. The same can be said for virtual reality. When you're fully immersed in a virtual world, your brain can't easily distinguish between real and virtual experiences. The fear you feel when you stand on the edge of a virtual cliff is just as real as the fear you'd feel in the physical world. The question is, does it matter that the cliff isn't real? But here's the critical question. If a virtual world can evoke real emotions, real thoughts, and real experiences, can it be considered as real as the physical world? Or is it simply an illusion that's tricking our brains? The new frontier of existence. Now, let's shift our focus to the future. Imagine a world where virtual reality becomes so advanced that we can create entire civilizations with people, histories, cultures, and ecosystems, all within a digital space. These virtual worlds could be so intricate and detailed that they rival the complexity of our physical world. In such a future, we wouldn't just use VR for entertainment or escape. We might begin to live in these worlds. Think about it. In VR, you could choose who you want to be, how you want to look, and even what world you want to inhabit. You could live in a medieval fantasy realm one day, and a futuristic metropolis the next. You could interact with other people from all over the world, forming communities and relationships within these digital spaces. Some might argue that these experiences are fake because they don't exist in the physical world. But if you spend more time in these virtual spaces than in the physical world, wouldn't they become your reality? This brings us to the simulation hypothesis, a theory proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom. The hypothesis suggests that it's possible we are already living in a simulated reality, created by an advanced civilization. According to this theory, if technology continues to advance at its current rate, future civilizations could have the ability to create highly sophisticated simulations of entire worlds, complete with conscious beings living in them, beings like us. If this were true, how would we ever know? Just like the prisoners in Plato's cave, we might be mistaking the shadows for the real world. Ethics of creating virtual realities. But creating virtual worlds raises important ethical questions. If we have the power to create entire civilizations within a virtual reality, do we have a responsibility to those digital beings? If they are conscious, like us, do they have rights? Could we be held accountable for our actions in these digital spaces, just as we are in the physical world? Imagine a future where virtual beings have their own thoughts, emotions, and experiences. They might believe their world is real, just as we believe ours is. If we decide to turn off a virtual world, is that equivalent to ending the lives of the beings within it? These are the kinds of ethical dilemmas that philosophers will need to grapple with as we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in virtual reality. Could we ever reach a point where the digital lives we create have the same value as our own? And more importantly, would we even be able to distinguish between the two? Living in virtual worlds, a new definition of reality. As we spend more time in virtual worlds, the line between physical and digital existence will continue to blur. Already, we see people forming deep emotional connections in online spaces, building friendships, and even romantic relationships in virtual environments. For many, these digital connections feel just as real, if not more so, than their relationships in the physical world. Virtual reality offers us the opportunity to explore new identities, experiences, and environments in ways that would be impossible in the physical world. You could become anyone, travel anywhere, and experience anything, all from the comfort of your living room. But as we dive deeper into these virtual worlds, we must ask ourselves, are these experiences any less meaningful because they happen in a digital space? The answer to this question is not straightforward. For some, the experiences they have in virtual worlds are just as real, just as valuable, and just as meaningful as those in the physical world. Others might argue that no matter how convincing the virtual world is, it will always be a shadow of the real thing. In the end, The question of whether we can create new realities through virtual reality may come down to our definition of reality itself. If reality is simply what we experience and perceive, then virtual worlds can be considered just as real as the physical world. After all, our brains process virtual experiences in much the same way they process physical experiences. The emotions we feel, the relationships we build, and the memories we create in virtual spaces are real, even if the environment they occur in is not. As virtual reality continues to evolve, it's likely that these questions will become even more pressing. The line between the virtual and the real will continue to blur, and we may eventually find ourselves living in a world where digital experiences are just as important, if not more so, than physical ones. But here's the ultimate curiosity gap to consider. If we can create new realities that are indistinguishable from the physical world, will we even care which is which? Ethical implications of virtual reality. As we move further into a future where virtual reality becomes a significant part of our lives, we cannot ignore the ethical dilemmas that arise. Virtual reality, by its very nature, has the power to blur the lines between right and wrong, real and simulated. But when the experiences we have in these digital spaces feel as real as those in the physical world, how should we approach ethical responsibility in virtual reality? Take a moment to think about the following scenario. You're in a virtual world, playing a game or engaging in some kind of social interaction. In this world, there are other avatars, representations of other real people. Some of these avatars might be controlled by other users like you, while others are artificial intelligences designed to mimic human behavior. The actions you take in this world may feel inconsequential because they happen in a digital space. But what happens when the line between the virtual and the real begins to blur, and your actions in VR have real consequences, either for others, for yourself, or for the world as a whole? Ethical questions in virtual worlds. This brings us to a crucial ethical question. Are we responsible for our actions in virtual spaces the same way we are in the physical world? For example, if you harm an avatar in a virtual world, and that avatar represents another human being, is that ethically wrong? Or is it acceptable because the environment is digital and not real? These are tough questions, and they challenge our traditional understanding of ethics. In many ways, virtual reality forces us to rethink what it means to be a moral agent in a world where the rules of reality don't always apply. Imagine a virtual world where anything is possible. You could create scenarios that would be impossible in the physical world, good or bad. In some cases, this can be beneficial. For example, VR can allow people to simulate complex medical surgeries or train in high-stress environments without the risk of real-world consequences. But on the other hand, it could also be used to engage in morally questionable behavior that would be unacceptable in the physical world. The line between reality and simulation. One of the most fascinating and dangerous elements of VR is its ability to simulate human interaction in ways that feel real. When you're in VR, your brain often reacts to what it sees and hears in the same way it would in the physical world. This means that actions taken in virtual reality can evoke real emotional and psychological responses, even if the environment is artificial. This raises the question: if something feels real, does it carry the same ethical weight as something that is real? For example, if someone were to engage in harmful behavior in a virtual world, whether against another human-controlled avatar or an AI, should they be held morally accountable? While some might argue that virtual worlds are merely a form of play, others contend that if the emotional impact is real, the ethical considerations should be as well. One area where this becomes particularly relevant is in social interactions within virtual worlds. As more people turn to VR for socialization, work, and even romantic relationships, the boundaries between digital and physical relationships start to dissolve. If you hurt someone emotionally in a virtual world, is that any different from doing so in the real world? And if people form deep emotional connections within VR, does the medium of the relationship Digital versus physical. Make a difference. Ethical responsibilities for creators. Another layer to this ethical debate concerns the creators of virtual worlds. Developers and designers of VR environments wield enormous power as they control the rules, physics, and possibilities within these spaces. With this power comes a significant ethical responsibility. Should developers be responsible for creating environments that encourage positive behavior? For example, should they limit harmful actions or scenarios within their virtual worlds? Or should they allow users total freedom to explore both the light and dark sides of human nature? If someone commits a harmful act within a VR environment, does any responsibility fall on the creators who enabled such behavior through the world's design? This ethical dilemma is already playing out in the world of gaming, where online harassment and toxic behavior in virtual spaces are widespread issues. The anonymity provided by virtual environments often leads to behavior that would not be acceptable in face-to-face interactions. In many cases, this has forced game developers to introduce strict guidelines and monitoring systems to prevent harmful behavior. But in more expansive, free-form virtual worlds, where the boundaries of what is possible are far broader, how should ethical behavior be enforced? Should we place the same ethical limitations on virtual worlds that we do on the physical world, or does the freedom of VR allow for the exploration of morally gray areas? And if virtual actions have real-world consequences, how do we hold people accountable for what they do in these digital spaces? Identity and ethics in VR. Virtual reality also gives us the unique ability to explore different identities. In VR, you can become someone else entirely. You can change your gender, age, appearance, and even personality. While this can be a positive way to explore different aspects of the self, it can also lead to ethical concerns. For instance, what happens when someone adopts an identity in VR that allows them to engage in behavior they would never consider in the real world? If someone behaves in a harmful or unethical way while using an avatar that looks nothing like them, are they more likely to feel detached from the consequences of their actions? In VR, the separation between your physical self and your virtual self creates a space where people may feel emboldened to act in ways they wouldn't normally act. However, this also raises an important point about empathy. In some cases, VR can be used to increase empathy by allowing people to experience life from a different perspective. For example, a VR experience could let someone walk in the shoes of another person, literally, and experience the world from their point of view. This has been used in therapeutic settings, where people can confront their fears or biases by stepping into the role of someone they would normally judge or fear. But if VR can increase empathy by allowing us to experience the world from another perspective, it can also decrease it. In the anonymity of virtual spaces, where actions may not seem to have real consequences, people might become desensitized to the feelings and experiences of others. VR and the law. Should virtual crimes be punished? A growing ethical debate in the realm of VR concerns the legal implications of actions taken in virtual spaces. For example, should crimes committed in a virtual world, such as harassment, theft, or violence, be subject to real-world legal consequences? In some cases, the law has already started to address these issues. For example, there have been instances of virtual harassment in online games that have led to real-world lawsuits. But as VR becomes more immersive and its social spaces more expansive, we may need to develop a whole new set of laws and ethical guidelines to govern these digital realms. Let's consider another scenario. If someone were to commit a violent act in VR against an AI character that was designed to mimic human behavior, should they be punished? Some might argue that, because no real person was harmed, the action doesn't warrant punishment. But if the AI character is so advanced that it appears to have consciousness, does this change the equation? And if virtual actions create real psychological harm, either to the user or to other people who witness these actions, should that be taken into account? In some ways, the law is always playing catch-up with technology, Virtual reality presents new and complex challenges for legal systems worldwide. Just as the rise of the Internet led to new laws about cybercrime and digital rights, we can expect that the rise of virtual reality will lead to new legal frameworks to address the unique ethical challenges of this medium. If we harm a conscious AI in a virtual world, should it be treated as an act of violence? Could we one day face legal consequences for actions taken in virtual reality? Conclusion to Section 3. The ethical implications of virtual reality are vast and complex. As we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in these digital spaces, we must also expand our understanding of ethics and responsibility. Virtual reality offers us the chance to explore new worlds, identities, and experiences. But with this freedom comes the need to think critically about our actions and their impact on ourselves, others, and the virtual beings we may one day create. In the end, the ethical questions raised by virtual reality aren't just about technology. They're about what it means to be human. As we navigate this new frontier, we will need to constantly reassess our values and ethics in the face of evolving digital realities. Identity and consciousness in virtual spaces. In the physical world, our identity is shaped by many factors: our appearance, our social roles, our relationships, and our experiences. But in virtual reality, we are given a unique opportunity. We can become whoever we want to be. With a few clicks, you can change your gender, your race, your age, and even transform into fantastical beings that don't exist in the real world. This newfound flexibility brings up profound questions about identity and consciousness in virtual spaces. What happens to our sense of self when we have the ability to completely alter our appearance and behavior? Can virtual reality help us explore different aspects of our identity, or does it risk disconnecting us from our true selves? Could a person's true self be better expressed in a virtual world than in the physical one? And what does it mean for our consciousness if we can shift between different identities in digital spaces? Exploring identity, freedom, and fragmentation. Virtual reality offers us an unparalleled level of freedom when it comes to exploring our identity. In the physical world, our identity is often shaped by external factors: how we look, where we come from, and how others perceive us. But in VR, these constraints disappear. You could be a middle-aged man in the real world, but in a virtual space, you might choose to appear as a young woman or even a non-human character. This freedom allows us to experiment with new aspects of our identity, breaking free from the social and physical limitations that define us in the real world. For some, this freedom can be empowering. It offers a chance to explore parts of themselves they may not feel comfortable expressing in the real world. For example, someone who struggles with their gender identity in real life might find solace in being able to present themselves as their true gender in VR. Others might use VR as a way to explore identities they're curious about, without the pressure or judgment that might come from doing so in the physical world. However, this freedom also comes with risks. Fragmentation of identity is one potential challenge. If we can switch between different identities in virtual spaces, does this lead to a fragmented sense of self? In VR, you could be one person today and someone entirely different tomorrow. While this flexibility can be liberating, it might also lead to confusion about who we really are. If our identity becomes too fluid, we might lose touch with the core aspects of ourselves. The role of consciousness in virtual spaces. Another profound question raised by virtual reality is the nature of consciousness in digital spaces. Consciousness is often thought of as the core of our being, our awareness of ourselves and the world around us. But what happens to consciousness when we immerse ourselves in a virtual environment? Does our sense of self change when we are inhabiting a digital body instead of a physical one? In some ways, VR allows us to experience what it might be like to step outside of our own consciousness and into the shoes of another. For example, in a VR environment, you might take on the role of a different person or even an AI, experiencing the world from their perspective. But does this shift in perspective change the nature of our consciousness, or does it merely give us a new lens through which to view the world? Some philosophers argue that VR could help us better understand the nature of consciousness by allowing us to experiment with different perspectives. If we can step into a virtual body and experience the world through that avatar, it suggests that our sense of self is more flexible and fluid than we might have thought. Others, however, worry that too much time spent in virtual environments could lead to a disconnection from our physical bodies and the real world. Is consciousness tied to our physical form, or can it exist independently in virtual spaces? Could VR help us expand our understanding of consciousness, or does it risk distorting our sense of self? Self-expression in virtual worlds. One of the most exciting aspects of virtual reality is the ability to explore self-expression in ways that are not possible in the physical world. In VR, you can become whoever or whatever you want to be. You can design your appearance down to the finest detail, creating an avatar that reflects your ideal self, or experimenting with completely new identities. For some people, this ability to craft a virtual self can be incredibly empowering. In the real world, we are often judged based on our appearance, age, or background. But in VR, you are free from these constraints. You can present yourself in any way you choose, and this can be a powerful tool for self-exploration and growth. People who feel limited by their physical appearance or societal expectations in the real world may find that they can express their true selves more authentically in virtual spaces. However, there is also a potential downside to this level of freedom. When we create idealized versions of ourselves in VR, we might start to feel disconnected from our physical bodies. If the virtual version of ourselves is more appealing or accepted than our real-world selves, we might become dissatisfied with who we are in the real world. This could lead to feelings of alienation or self-doubt as we navigate between our virtual and physical identities. Relationships and identity in VR. Another significant area where identity is shaped in VR is through our relationships. Just as in the real world, we form connections with others in virtual spaces. In some cases, these relationships can feel just as deep and meaningful as those we have in real life. But when we present ourselves through avatars, the dynamics of these relationships change. In virtual reality, the person you are interacting with might look completely different from who they are in real life. They might have chosen an avatar that reflects their ideal self or one that is entirely unrelated to who they are physically. This raises important questions about trust and authenticity in virtual relationships. If someone presents themselves as one thing in VR, but is completely different in real life, does that change the nature of the relationship? Moreover, if we spend a significant amount of time in virtual spaces where we are free to experiment with different aspects of our identity, does this affect how we relate to others in the real world? For some, the ability to explore different identities in VR might strengthen their real-world relationships, allowing them to better understand themselves and their needs. But for others, the fluidity of identity in VR might make it harder to form authentic, lasting connections in the real world. The future of identity in virtual reality. As VR technology continues to advance, we may reach a point where the distinction between our virtual and physical identities becomes even more blurred. With the rise of the Metaverse, a shared virtual space where people can interact, work, and play, the way we think about identity is likely to change. In the future, we may spend as much time, if not more, in virtual spaces as we do in the physical world. When that happens, our virtual identities may become just as important, if not more so, than our physical ones. But as we continue to explore and expand our identities in virtual spaces, we must also be mindful of the challenges that come with this freedom. The ability to shape our identity in any way we choose can be empowering, but it also raises difficult questions about authenticity, self-perception, and how we relate to others. In the end, virtual reality offers us an incredible opportunity to explore new aspects of our identity and consciousness. It allows us to break free from the constraints of the physical world and experiment with different ways of being. But with this freedom comes new challenges, as we must navigate the complexities of self-expression, authenticity, and relationships in a digital world. As virtual spaces become an increasingly important part of our lives, we will need to continually ask ourselves, who are we when we are no longer bound by the limitations of the physical world? The future of relationships and community in virtual worlds. In our ever-expanding digital age, relationships are no longer confined to physical interactions. The rise of social media, online gaming, and now virtual reality is changing the way we connect with others. Virtual reality offers an entirely new frontier for human relationships, allowing us to interact with others in ways that were once unimaginable. But as VR continues to develop, we must ask ourselves, what does the future hold for relationships and communities in these digital spaces? Imagine a world where you can attend a family gathering without leaving your home, or where you can hang out with friends across the globe as if they were right next to you. Virtual reality is making this possible, but it also raises important questions. Are relationships formed in virtual spaces as meaningful as those in the real world? And can virtual communities replace physical ones? The evolution of social interaction in VR. Virtual reality is already reshaping how we socialize. Platforms like reshape and Altspace VR are creating spaces where people can meet, talk, and form friendships in virtual environments. In these worlds, you can be anywhere and anyone, and still connect with others who share your interests. It's not just about the technology. It's about the experiences and relationships you build in these spaces. For many, the social interaction in virtual reality feels more immersive and personal than traditional online communication. You can read body language, interact with the environment, and feel as though you're truly present with the other person, even if they're thousands of miles away. This immersive quality has led to the formation of virtual communities where people gather to share ideas, support one another, and form deep connections. But this also brings up the question, can virtual relationships ever fully replace physical ones? While the technology allows us to interact with others in real time, there's still something fundamentally different about being physically present with someone. For some, the tactile and sensory experience of physical presence is irreplaceable. For others, the emotional and intellectual connections formed in virtual spaces are just as meaningful as those in the real world. Virtual communities and digital kinships. As more people spend time in virtual worlds, we're starting to see the rise of virtual communities, groups of people who come together to share experiences, build friendships, and even form digital families. These communities can be just as diverse and complex as those in the physical world, with their own social norms, hierarchies, and traditions. In some ways, virtual communities offer opportunities that physical ones cannot. They can bring together people from all over the world, transcending geographical, cultural, and even language barriers. In VR, you can join a community where you feel truly understood and accepted, regardless of where you come from in the physical world. For people who feel isolated or misunderstood in their real-world communities, these virtual spaces can offer a sense of belonging that might otherwise be hard to find. However, this also raises a significant question. Can virtual communities truly replace the physical bonds we form with others? While virtual interactions can feel real and meaningful, they lack certain aspects of physical connection. Touch, smell, and the full range of sensory experiences that come with face-to-face interaction. It's possible that virtual communities will never fully replace physical ones, but they will certainly complement them, offering new ways to form and maintain relationships. Will virtual communities grow to replace our physical ones, or will they simply enhance how we connect? Can the emotional depth of a virtual friendship or relationship rival that of one built in the real world? The future of love and relationships in virtual spaces. As virtual reality becomes more advanced, we may see the rise of romantic relationships formed entirely in virtual spaces. In fact, this is already happening. Virtual worlds offer a unique environment where people can form deep emotional connections without the usual physical and social barriers. You could meet someone in a virtual world, form a connection, and even fall in love, all without ever meeting them in person. But this raises an interesting dilemma. Can a relationship that begins in a virtual space be as meaningful as one that starts in the physical world? Some might argue that the emotions we feel in virtual spaces are just as real as those we feel in person, and that virtual relationships can be just as deep and meaningful. Others might contend that, without physical interaction, something essential is missing. There's also the question of identity. In a virtual world, people have the freedom to present themselves in any way they choose. This can lead to more open and honest interactions, as people feel less restricted by their physical appearance or social status. But it can also lead to deception, as people may not always be who they claim to be. In the future, we may need to develop new ways of building trust and authenticity in virtual relationships, just as we have in the physical world. Virtual connections and loneliness. As we spend more time in virtual spaces, we must also consider the potential impact on loneliness and isolation. On one hand, virtual reality has the power to bring people together in ways that were never before possible. It can offer a sense of community and belonging to those who might feel isolated in the real world. But on the other hand, there's a risk that as we form more relationships in virtual spaces, we might become more disconnected from the people around us in the physical world. Some people may find it easier to form relationships in virtual spaces than in the real world, where social anxiety, physical appearance, or other barriers might make it difficult to connect. But if virtual relationships become the norm, will we lose the ability to form meaningful connections in the real world? These are important questions to consider as we move toward a future where the line between virtual and physical relationships continues to blur. The future of relationships and communities in virtual worlds is filled with both promise and uncertainty. Virtual reality offers us the chance to connect with others in ways that were once impossible, but it also challenges our understanding of what it means to form meaningful relationships. As VR continues to evolve, we must find a balance between the connections we form in virtual spaces and the relationships we nurture in the physical world. Will we one day live in a world where virtual communities are just as important as physical ones? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear. Virtual reality is not just changing the way we play and work. It's transforming the way we connect with one another. Living in virtual worlds. Future prospects. As virtual reality continues to advance, we are inching closer to a future where people may spend significant portions of their lives in virtual worlds. What was once considered a futuristic concept, confined to the realms of science fiction, is now becoming a very real possibility. These digital worlds are more than just places for games or entertainment. They are spaces where people can work, socialize, learn, and even live. But what does it mean to live in a virtual world? And how will this shift impact our daily lives, our relationships, and our understanding of reality? In this section, we will explore the potential future of living in virtual worlds and what that might mean for human society. A world beyond entertainment. Currently, most virtual reality experiences are designed for entertainment, immersive games, virtual tours, and simulations. But we're starting to see the potential for virtual worlds to go far beyond that. In the near future, we may see people using VR not just for entertainment, but for work, education, and even daily life activities. Imagine waking up in the morning and instead of commuting to an office, you put on your VR headset and enter a virtual workspace. You attend meetings, collaborate with colleagues, and complete tasks, all in a digital environment. For some industries, this is already becoming a reality, with virtual workspaces enabling people from across the globe to collaborate as if they were in the same room. Education is another area where virtual worlds are poised to make a major impact. VR can create immersive learning environments where students can explore historical events, conduct scientific experiments, or visit places they would never have access to in the real world. The potential for virtual education is vast, offering students personalized, hands-on learning experiences that could revolutionize traditional education systems. The Metaverse, a new frontier. One of the most talked about concepts in the tech world today is the Metaverse, a vast, interconnected virtual space where people can live, work, socialize, and play. The idea of the Metaverse is that it would function much like the internet, but instead of simply browsing websites or watching videos, you would inhabit these digital spaces. The Metaverse would be a fully immersive environment where you can seamlessly move between different virtual worlds, interacting with other users, and participating in all aspects of life. The potential for the Metaverse is enormous, and many believe it could become the next major evolution of the internet. Companies like Meta, formerly Facebook, are already investing heavily in the development of the Metaverse, with the goal of creating a shared virtual space where people can engage in a wide range of activities, from work and education to socializing and entertainment. But the Metaverse also raises important questions about privacy, identity, and control. If we live more of our lives in virtual spaces, who will control these environments? Will they be owned and governed by tech companies, or will there be decentralized, user-controlled spaces? And what happens to our personal data when we spend so much time in digital worlds? Will we reach a point where living in virtual worlds is not just an option, but a necessity for some aspects of life? Could the Metaverse become a place where we spend more time than in the physical world, balancing virtual and physical lives? As we start to live more of our lives in virtual spaces, a key question will be how we balance our virtual existence with our physical one. It's easy to imagine a future where people spend more time in VR than in the real world, working, socializing, and even relaxing in these immersive environments. But what does this mean for our physical lives? One concern is the potential for disconnection from the physical world. As VR becomes more immersive and engaging, there's a risk that people may start to neglect their physical surroundings. We've already seen this with other forms of technology. Social media, for example, has led to concerns about people becoming more isolated from face-to-face interactions. VR could amplify this effect, making it even easier to escape into a virtual world where everything is controlled and tailored to your preferences. However, some argue that virtual worlds can actually enhance our physical lives by offering new opportunities for connection and self-expression. For example, people with physical disabilities or those living in remote areas could use VR to experience things they wouldn't otherwise have access to, leveling the playing field in terms of opportunity and access. Virtual worlds could allow people to overcome physical limitations, connecting with others, and exploring new environments in ways that are impossible in the real world. A fully virtual lifestyle. It's not hard to imagine a future where fully virtual lifestyles become a reality. In such a future, people might spend the majority of their time in digital worlds, only emerging into the physical world for basic necessities like eating and sleeping. In these virtual spaces, you could have a job, form relationships, and build a community, all without ever leaving your home. But would this shift to a fully virtual lifestyle be a positive development? On one hand, it could offer unprecedented freedom and flexibility. People would no longer be bound by physical geography, and they could craft their own realities to suit their needs and desires. But on the other hand, there's a risk that living in virtual worlds could lead to alienation from the physical world and from our own bodies. Will a fully virtual lifestyle improve our quality of life, or will it disconnect us from the real world? How will living in virtual worlds impact our physical health, mental well-being, and relationships? Living in virtual worlds offers incredible potential for innovation and connection, but it also presents new challenges. As we move toward a future where virtual spaces play an increasingly important role in our lives, we must find ways to balance our digital and physical realities. Virtual worlds have the power to enrich our lives, but we must also be mindful of the potential risks: disconnection, isolation, and the blurring of reality itself. The future of living in virtual worlds is both exciting and uncertain, but one thing is clear: it will change the way we think about life, work, and relationships forever. Recap of philosophical ideas. Throughout this video, we've explored the profound and complex philosophical questions that arise from the growing presence of virtual reality in our lives. From the nature of reality to the ethics of creating and living in virtual worlds, VR challenges our deepest assumptions about existence, identity, and relationships. The power to create entire realities is no longer a distant dream. It is quickly becoming part of our everyday lives, and the implications are vast. We started by asking some of the most fundamental questions. What is reality? Is it defined by the physical world around us, or can we create new realities in virtual spaces that feel just as real? Drawing on philosophical thought experiments like Plato's Allegory of the Cave and the simulation hypothesis, we explored how VR challenges our traditional understanding of what it means to live in a real world. As VR becomes more immersive and advanced, the line between virtual and physical realities will continue to blur, forcing us to reconsider what we consider real. Ethics and identity in virtual worlds. We then turned our attention to the ethical dilemmas posed by virtual reality. When we interact with others in virtual spaces, are we bound by the same ethical responsibilities as we are in the physical world? As VR allows us to experience things that were once impossible, we must grapple with the moral consequences of our actions in these digital spaces. If we can commit acts in VR that would be unethical in real life, how do we navigate the moral gray areas that arise from this new form of existence? At the same time, virtual reality offers unprecedented opportunities for exploring identity. In VR, we can experiment with different aspects of ourselves, adopting new appearances, personas, and roles. This freedom to reshape our identity can be empowering, but it also raises questions about authenticity and self-perception. As we spend more time in virtual spaces, how do we maintain a coherent sense of self? Can VR help us discover our true selves, or does it risk fragmenting our identity? Relationships and community in virtual worlds. We also explored the evolving nature of relationships and communities in virtual worlds. VR allows us to connect with others across the globe in ways that transcend physical limitations. These virtual spaces offer the potential to form deep, meaningful relationships, whether they be friendships, romantic partnerships, or even entire virtual communities. But as we form these connections, we must ask ourselves, are virtual relationships as valuable as physical ones? And how do we build trust and authenticity in relationships that exist primarily in digital spaces? While virtual communities offer new forms of connection, they also present the risk of isolation. As more people turn to virtual spaces for social interaction, we must be mindful of how these relationships impact our sense of belonging in the real world. Will virtual communities complement or replace physical ones? Only time will tell, but the future of social interaction is undoubtedly changing. The future of living in virtual worlds. Looking forward, the idea of living in virtual worlds full-time is no longer far-fetched. The development of the Metaverse, a fully immersive digital universe where people can work, socialize, and play, promises to reshape how we live our lives. In the future, we may spend more time in virtual spaces than in the physical world, blurring the boundaries between the two. But with this shift comes new challenges. How do we balance our virtual lives with our physical realities? If we begin to spend the majority of our time in virtual environments, what happens to our connection with the real world? There's potential for incredible innovation, but also the risk of disconnection. We may find that living in virtual worlds enhances our lives in ways we've never imagined, but we must also be careful not to lose ourselves in the process. As we move into this new era of virtual reality, it's clear that we are on the verge of a profound transformation. VR is more than just a tool for entertainment. It is a gateway to new worlds, new experiences, and new ways of being. But with this power comes the responsibility to think critically about the implications of living in digital spaces. We must ask ourselves, how do we want to shape these virtual worlds? What kind of relationships, communities, and realities do we want to create? And how can we ensure that we maintain our ethical and philosophical grounding as we explore this exciting new frontier. If you found this video thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the future of technology, philosophy, and the human experience. Like this video, share it with others, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How you think virtual reality will shape our future? We'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the philosophy of virtual reality. Stay curious, keep questioning, and as always, remember, the future is yours to create.